Alright everybody, this is my build of my 2022 PC. So the specs on the system are this. The CPU is Intel i5-12600K. I've got a Hyper 212 CPU cooler on it. The motherboard is an MSI B660M. I've put 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM on it. The video card is a GTX 3070 Ti. And after having a power supply not work for me, I bought another one, an 850 watt power supply. And that is the previous motherboard I was working with, the 66OM Steel Legend, which I believe now has some bent pins. Underneath that is a case that I bought. The case is the Master Box Q300L. I bought it because I saw some initial interesting reviews, and then after I bought it, I found some other reviews that told me all the little holes in the case did not actually make it cool well. In fact, it had big heating problems. So, also it did not have a good front panel, which I wanted, so I went with this Minitower N200, which is a much older case, but yeah, I still got it new, and it was still very cheap, much less than $100, something like 60. And it had everything I needed. That's my Cooler Master 212 Black Edition. Extremely popular CPU cooler, and I've used them before. They're absurdly tall, but as long as your case can fit it, it works great. I had also purchased a bunch of silent fans because I really wanted a silent PC. Unfortunately, these 140 millimeter fans were going to fit on the old case, the Q300L, before I decided not to use that case, and there's no space for 140 millimeter fans in the new case. So this is another image of the Trident Z stick of 16 gigs of RAM, and underneath it is a solid state drive, a 2 terabyte M2 drive. Turns out this motherboard that I'm using now can have two M2 solid state drives, and I really like them, and so I actually wound up getting two 2 terabyte solid state drives. So I've got 4 terabytes of solid state basically built into the motherboard now. This mag motherboard, as you can see, it has basically everything, plus a big stack of USB 2.0 and several USB 3.2. So this is an image of basically all the cables that came with my modular power supply. So now I've got to untie this and pull it apart like the snake's nest it is, and use the cables that I want and not use the cables that I don't want. I'm going to wind up using almost all of them. Now I've got the CPU and the motherboard working now with the power supply. This is actually not running the i5. It's got an i3 CPU that I put in, but it's working, and it's making me happy that it's working. Finally, obviously I fiddled around with the different parts. I've got both sticks of RAM in, got all the power on, got the fan blowing, but the fan is not actually connected to the big radiator that you see there. And I'll come back to this, but the stupid little metal clips that hold the fan onto the radiator are stupid. They're awful, and they were no end of trouble for me. Very, very frustrating to work with. And if you leave them alone and if you're not doing anything, they kind of hold the fan on. They don't grip like with a death grip, they just hold it on. The problem is if you bump it with your hand, it all comes apart and little metal clips fall down into your PC. So I've pulled off the power supply, I pulled off the heatsink, and you can see the chip here naked except for some thermal paste. Alright, so I've put my more powerful CPU into this socket, this 1700 series socket, and I've added some paste ready to put the heatsink block back on. This is the cover for the stick of M2 hard drive. which is exactly the shape and size of a stick of gum. Welcome to the future. And I am now going to install it on the motherboard. So this is an micro ATX motherboard, and you can see now I have the fan attached to the heatsink, and I also have my GeForce GTX 3070 Ti video card installed, and all the various power going off it so that it can actually, I can prove that it works. It's still running off of my EVGA power supply just fine. Again, this is an MATX motherboard, and this is a mini tower case. This is a case that's not designed for a full-size board because I wanted a smaller case. Now, the big problem with smaller cases, of course, is all of the hassle you go through because the not having enough space. If you had enough space, it'd be easier, but you would have a bigger, heavier computer when you're all done. Now I have the EVGA power supply installed, and I've got the motherboard installed and running. Got the fan, and as you can see, I've got little metal clips. If you can see very carefully, I've got little metal clips on each side holding that fan into place. And it's a nightmare because if I just sneeze on it, those clips come popping off and falling into the CPU, and it's a big mess. And getting them rehooked up is a giant hassle. But a lot of things are a giant hassle in this case. It's a smaller case, and it's very cramped compared to what's called a full-size tower or even a mid-tower. And I will have to keep popping in and out the video card because the video card is so big that basically I have to take the video card out in order to do almost anything in terms of adding, plugging something in or adding something. Now here I have the video card actually hooked up, and you can see there's not much space to get my big hands in there. I've got two fans in the front. It actually came with one, so I actually installed one of my silent fans into the front. So 3 fans plus the CPU fan, and it's still a very, very silent PC build, and I couldn't be happier with that. But it took a while to get there. So I have plugged in a couple of specialty attachments to the front panel, which are taking up the space where the 5.5 inch and 3.5 inch bay are, and they're both USB things. If you can look way down in there, that's where one of my M2 SSD hard drives is residing, under that metal lip that's labeled 01. Unfortunately, that's locked in. And you can also see the little metal clip from the CPU fan has dropped down in there and is a bugger to get out. In fact, I believe to fix that this time I had to pull the GPU again, just to get my hands down in there so that I could get the little metal clip back in the bay. Now I'm looking at the bay where the 2 hard drives are going. I'm going to put 2 hard drives. I'm going to transplant 2 hard drives from my old machine. They're each 5 terabyte hard drives, so easiest just to transplant them. And they pop in pretty well. I have to basically unscrew a bunch of, like 6 screws. So, in conclusion, a small case will cut you, especially if it's cheap. It will also make you swear a lot as you drop screws and remove parts to plug in other things. Also, if you're going to drill holes and add handles, do it first before installing anything in the case. Also, expect one of your major parts to be faulty, so test everything first. Also, never install a part into your case until it's been proven to work. Get the motherboard to show a boot screen before you install anything into the case. Also, the little metal fan clips on a Hyper 212 CPU cooler are a joke and a nightmare.